Previously on Between Light and Shadow.
If you could pick one Serling lesson to prescribe the world right now, which would it be?
I think The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street is the one that has grown in resonance the most as we've become more divided as a nation. I mean, Rod was clearly writing about the McCarthy era. That was his parable about divisions from fear and suspicion. And it all comes out of the Red Scare. But that episode has increased in resonance for the entire nation on all levels as we've become more divided on all levels. Something which just happens a lot. It happens on the internet. It happens in politics. It happens in social media. And that is, people are so intent on looking for monsters. And the people who are so intent on looking for monsters often enough turn into the monsters themselves. And that is the message of The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street.
Where are we? Where are we?
Between light and shadow.
If you're a fan of the classic Universal horror films, you're very familiar with the sight of mobs of angry villagers wielding pitchforks and torches, chasing after lab monsters or other supernatural critters on the rampage. On the Twilight Zone, the mobs aren't chasing monsters, they're chasing one another. Hey gang, this is Craig, and you're listening to Between Light and Shadow, a Twilight Zone podcast. This week, we're looking at two different suburban American neighborhoods and the residents that populate them. Each group will face an unexpected crisis, and each will reveal the baser, uglier side of human nature as their civility unravels. They will become the very monsters that they're seeking to persecute. First up, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Originally premiered March 4th, 1960, the 22nd episode of the Twilight Zone's first season. We open on a sunny Saturday afternoon on Maple Street, an almost impossibly idyllic neighborhood. The men are mowing their lawns and washing their cars. The kids are riding their bikes without helmets. Hey, it's 1960. And the women are indoors, presumably seething with resentment that their only option in life is to pump out babies and obey their husbands. Again, 1960. An ice cream truck appears, and the kids immediately pounce, forming a kind of eager and innocent mob, a cute precursor to the adult mob we'll see later on, which will be much bigger, much more violent, and much less cute. Something loud and, glowing passes by overhead.
What was that, a meteor?
Yeah, that's what it looked like. I didn't hear any crash, though, did you?
No, I didn't hear anything except a roar.
Okay, yeah, sure. It was a meteor. That's a reasonable assumption, I guess. I mean, it didn't have the big whooshing sound you'd expect, and the glow it cast across the neighborhood looked a bit artificial, kind of stroby versus the organic glow of an object burning up on re-entry. And the sound emanating from it had a certain cheesy sci-fi flying saucer quality to it, but okay, whatever. It was a meteor. Suddenly, all the power goes out. Lights, appliances, but also lawnmowers and cars, which doesn't make sense because why would a power outage affect things that aren't plugged into the wall? Even telephones and battery-powered radios are suddenly inert. Some kind of magnetic interference, maybe? Or what about sunspots? I mean, sure, maybe. I mean, it seems a bit less likely, but it's still reasonable. Rational, not crazy at all. That'll come soon enough. Pete Van Horn, a lovable old codger, heads over to see if the next neighborhood has also lost power. They make a point of showing us that he has a hammer hanging off of his overalls. Is this an ominous portent of things to come? I don't know. Anyway, neighbors Steve and Charlie decide to walk into town to see what's going on. And then, this kid.
Mr. Brand, you better not.
Why not?
They don't want you to.
Who doesn't want us to?
Them?
Them? What do you mean, Tommy? What are you talking about?
They don't want us to leave. That's why they shut everything off. It's always that way in every story I've ever read about a ship landing from outer space.
From outer space shit. Sally, you better take him upstairs, put him to bed.
Wait, did she say... Hang on.
From outer space shit.
Did you hear it? I didn't hear outer space ship. I think she said outer space shit. Looks like we need to employ a little... Using advanced audio tools, we will zero in on the exact word and manipulate it in the hopes that we can clear this up. Now here's the original line.
From outer space shit.
Mm-hmm. Now let's isolate just the one word.
Shit.
And again.
Shit.
Now let's see what happens when we slow it down.
Shit.
It sounds a lot like she said shit. Let's slow it down even more.
Shit.
I'm like 97% sure she said shit right there. And at first I thought maybe it was some sort of weird dubbing accident, like a kink in the tape or something, so the word got distorted. But it sounds really clear. I even got up really close to the TV and watched her lips move, and her lips do not meet where the P sound would be if she said ship. So I can only conclude that she actually said the word shit on location and nobody ever noticed. You know, I should probably do a bit more research. Wait, I have the teleplay. It was published in Twilight Zone Magazine in the second issue ever, May 1981. In fact, I have the entire run in mostly mint condition in a plastic tote like 5 feet away from me. So hang on while I dig it out. I actually have 2 sets, one in excellent to mint condition, boarded and bagged for maximum protection, then another mostly complete set of less pristine copies, some are the very opposite of pristine, for reading, scanning, and general pawing through. That set is somewhere out in my garage, so I have no choice but to momentarily liberate my mint copy from its plastic cocoon. All in the name of research. Oh man, this is really, it really is mint condition. Oh my god. Okay, let's see, where is it? Oh my god, remember when magazines used to come with the little subscription card stuck in them? It's still here. It's a little bit yellow, but yeah, Twilight Zone Magazine. Let's see here. The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Page 95. All right. Let's see here. Okay. In Serling's teleplay, the line is from outer space yet, not from outer space ship. Which, yeah, that's more grammatically correct, isn't it? Let's go back to the tape.
Shit.
Shit. Shit.
Okay, I guess if you slightly slur the transition from space to yet and pronounce yet without really emphasizing the okay, Still sounds like she says shit, but okay.
Mr. Brand, please don't leave here. You might not even be able to get to town. It was that way in the story. Nobody could leave. Nobody except...
Except who?
Except the people they'd sent down ahead of them. That was the way they prepared things for the landing. They sent 4 people, a mother and a father and 2 kids who looked just like humans. But they weren't.
Man, that kid is annoying with a capital STFU. And see, this is where they lose me a bit. Now imagine yourself in this situation. Power goes out, nothing works. Within minutes, a kid tells you that it's because of an alien invasion. Would you even entertain the possibility for a second? Yeah, neither would I. So we suspend our disbelief and move forward. So everybody is suddenly very uncomfortable because maybe, just maybe, there's an alien invasion happening, versus something mundane and or believable.
Does your car start, Les?
No dice. Well, I don't know what's wrong. Nothing seems to be working. Can't even get the car started.
And then...
Car started somehow. He got his car started.
How come his car just up and started like that?
All by itself. He wasn't anywhere near it. It just started all by itself.
He never did come out to look at that thing that flew overhead. He wasn't even interested.
He always was an oddball. Him and his whole family.
Yeah, why didn't he come out with the rest of us to look?
What do you say we go ask him?
The group surges toward Les. No pitchforks, no torches, but they're still looking a hell of a lot like an angry mob. Steve, the de facto voice of reason, tries to chill them out.
Wait a minute! Wait a minute! Now let's not be a mob!
They slow to a walk and surround Les just as the car shuts off by itself. The neighbors demand answers.
Okay, so I've got a car that starts by itself. Well, it's a freak thing, I admit it, but what's it make me, a criminal or something? I don't know why it starts, it just does. What's this all about, Steve?
We're on a monster kick, Les. Seems the general impression now holds that maybe there's a family that isn't what we think they are. Monsters from outer space or something different than us.
This is a gag or something? What is this, a practical joke or something?
And there it is, the standard Twilight Zone first response. It must be a gag. One of the neighbors starts pushing Les further under the bus.
Well, sometimes I stay up late at night, and a couple of times I've come out on my porch, and I've seen Les Goodman here in the wee hours of the morning, standing in his yard, just looking up at the sky. That's right, just looking up at the sky as though he were waiting for something, as though he were looking for something.
Les attempts to address the group.
You know what I'm guilty of? I'm guilty of insomnia. Now, what's the penalty for that?
The group backs away as he approaches.
Well, you heard what I said. I said it was insomnia. I said it was insomnia. You scared, frightened rabbits, you. You're sick people, do you know that? You're sick people, all of you. And you don't even know what you're starting here, because let me tell you, you're starting something here that's what you should be frightened of. As God is my witness, you're letting something begin here that's a nightmare.
And we cut to a commercial. It's night when we come back. Les is on his front porch. The neighbors are standing watch from a safe distance. I mean, safe unless he decides to incinerate them with his ray gun, which probably has a range of at least 300 yards, because nobody brings their little pea shooter to an interplanetary invasion.
Just doesn't seem right keeping watch on them. Why, they're our neighbors. We've known the Goodmans ever since they came here.
That don't prove a thing. Any guy who'd spend his time looking up at the sky early in the morning, there's something wrong with that kind of a person. Something that ain't legitimate. Under normal circumstances, we'd let it go by, but these aren't normal circumstances. Look at that street. Nothing but candles. It's like going back into the Dark Ages or something.
Steve tries to talk to Les. Les insists that he is exactly who he says he is.
What I want to know is, what are we going to do? Just stand around here all night?
There's nothing else we can do. One of them will tip their hand. They got to.
There's something you can do, Charlie. You can go inside and keep your mouth shut. you can quit sitting there like a self-appointed hanging judge and just climb into bed and forget it.
You sound pretty anxious to have that happen, Steve. I guess we ought to keep an eye on you, too.
Yeah, I think maybe everything might as well come out now. Your wife's been doing a little talking, Steve, about some of the odd things you've been doing.
Yeah? Well, go ahead, Don. Tell us what she said.
Go ahead. What's my wife said? Let's get it all out.
Well, Myra's talked about how there's been plenty of nights you spent hours down in your basement working on some kind of radio or something. Well, none of us have ever seen that radio.
Ooh. Even Les looks interested. Hey, whatever takes the heat off him, right? Now, up till now, Steve and Les have been the default heroes of the piece. Steve's the voice of reason, and Les is the unfairly persecuted. But if the unfairly persecuted goes along with persecuting the voice of reason, then...
It's just a ham radio set, that's all. I bought the book for him myself. It's just a ham radio set. A lot of people have them. I'll show it to you. It's down in the basement.
No, we won't show them anything. If they want to look inside our house, let them get a search warrant.
Look, buddy, you can't afford to...
Now, Charlie, don't you tell me what I can afford. And stop telling me who's dangerous and who isn't, and who's safe and who's a menace. And you're with them, too, all of you. You're all standing out here, all set to crucify somebody. You're all set to find a scapegoat. You're all desperate to point some kind of a finger at a neighbor. Well, believe me, friends, the only thing that's going to happen is that we're going to eat each other up alive.
His words seem to land with the group. There's an uncomfortable silence, which is broken by the sound of distant footsteps approaching.
It's the monster! It's the monster!
As the shadowy figure slowly approaches, Don races into his house and comes back with...
What, a shotgun? Will somebody think a thought or anything? What good is a shotgun?
Don't talk, Steve. You're gonna talk us right into a grave. You'd let whatever's out there walk right over us, wouldn't you? Well, some of us won't.
That's interesting. Steve continues to try to keep the peace, but he seems to now believe that they are, in fact, under threat of an alien invasion. A shotgun. What good's a shotgun against that? Charlie grabs the rifle away and aims. We get a close tracking shot of the monster's midsection, and we see what appears to be a hammer hanging from... Wait, are those overalls? Oh, shit! The big, scary alien monster falls. But he's not scary, and he's not alien.
It's Pete Van Horn.
Pete Van Horn? Well, he was just going over to the next block to see if the power was on.
Hold up. This has always bugged me just a bit. When this all started, it was maybe mid to late afternoon. Now, since it's summertime, it wouldn't get fully dark until maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock. So at the earliest, this is probably 10:30 p.m. or so. So it took Pete Van Horn approximately 5 hours to walk over to the next block and back? Where the hell has he been? Anyway, it doesn't matter now. He's stone cold dead. Up till now, the potential for things to go terribly awry was all theoretical. Tensions were running high, words were exchanged, tempers were flaring, but it was still at a point that you could come back from. No uncrossable lines had been crossed. But now...
Charlie, you killed him. He's dead.
I didn't know who he was. I most certainly didn't know who he was. Well, he came out of the darkness. How was I supposed to know he wasn't a monster or something? I was only trying to protect my home. I didn't know it was somebody we knew.
And then, as if on cue... the lights in Charlie's house suddenly pop on.
What about it, Charlie? How come you're the only one with lights now?
That's what I'd like to know. You were so quick to kill Charlie, and so quick to tell us who we had to look out for. Well, maybe you had to kill. Maybe Pete there was trying to tell us something. Maybe Pete learned something and came back to tell us who it was amongst us we had to look out for.
No, it's nothing of the sort. I didn't know the lights on, I swear I didn't. Somebody's pulling a gag or something.
Ah, the gag thing again. Funny how he never considered that possibility before when he had nothing to lose.
A gag? A gag! Charlie, there's a man lying dead in the street and you killed him. Does that look like a gag to you?
The crowd closes in on Charlie. He bolts and heads for his house. Rocks are thrown. He takes one to the head. Blood pours down his face.
Look! Look, I swear it isn't me! I swear it isn't! I know who it is! I know who the monster is! I know who it is that doesn't belong among us! I swear I know who it is! It's a kid! It's Tommy!
Wait, what?
It isn't so. He's a little boy. It was this kid who knew what was going to happen. He was the one who knew. How did he know? How could he have known?
How did you know, Tommy?
What's the matter with you people now? Stop!
How did you know?
So we've got one man dead, and now the mob is moving aggressively toward a child. Yes, apparently this situation can get darker. Now Steve tries to intervene to talk some sense into them before the poor kid gets Pete Van Horned, but they're stuck in full-on mob mentality mode. Tommy runs for it, and the chase is on, and then the lights pop on in someone else's house. Then another. Then another. And all hell has officially broken loose. People are running wild in the streets. Rocks are flying, dogs are crying, bullets are flying, folks are dying. And then we pull back away from the self-destructing neighborhood and up to a nearby hill, where two men are observing the carnage from a safe distance.
Understand the procedure now? Just stop a few of their machines and radios and telephones and lawnmowers, throw them into darkness for a few hours, and then sit back and watch the pattern.
And this pattern is always the same?
With few variations. They pick the most dangerous enemy they can find, and it's themselves. All we need to do is sit back and watch.
And aha! We've got ourselves a Forbidden Planet alert. Well, technically two. Now, first and foremost, that spaceship is, of course, the C-57D Starcruiser, which the Twilight Zone trots out whenever they need a flying saucer. Well, most of the time, anyway. This is a life-sized mock-up of the underside of the ship, complete with retractable stairs and landing gear. And those two aliens are decked out in the same uniforms worn by Leslie Nielsen and his intrepid crew. So yeah, I'm going to count it as two Forbidden Planet alerts. Actually, it could be argued that there are three, since we also get a shot of the C-57D Starcruiser in space, which is actually a shot taken directly out of Forbidden Planet, cropped to Academy ratio, decolorized, and ran in reverse and upside down, so it appears to be leaving Earth rather than arriving. So yeah, that's three distinct Forbidden Planet alerts right there. On a related note, there's a website called Fab Gear USA that offers a really snazzy replica of the Forbidden Planet uniform, you know, for cosplay purposes, Halloween costumes, or just casually dressing up around the house. It's actually several components sold separately: hat, tunic, pants, belt. $299.95 for all four, and for another $199.95 you can actually get a full-size replica of the Forbidden Planet laser pistol. I'll drop a link in the show notes. I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't mind dropping 5 Cs and hooking myself up. Well, on second thought, if I had 5 Cs to blow frivolously, I'd probably rather spend it on records or maybe some really high-end scotch. Does that mean I'm finally growing up?
Then I take it this place, this Maple Street, is not unique.
By no means. Their world is full of Maple Streets. And we'll go from one to the other and let them destroy themselves. One to the other. One to the other. One to the other.
Okay, so they were aliens after all. It was all true. The kid was right. And rather than uniting against a common enemy, real or perceived, the residents of Maple Street instead opted to lose their minds and destroy one another. And they won't be the last. Monsters Are Due on Maple Street was the first of 3 Twilight Zones directed by Ronald Winston. He also did The Big Tall Wish, also in Season 1, then came back 4 years later for a stopover in A Quiet Town in Season 5. And it's interesting, he wasn't a terribly prolific director. IMDb lists 28 credits spanning 1958 to 1972, and most of those were in the early to mid-60s. He died in 1973 at the tender age of 40. Now, if we math that out, we find that he directed this episode when he was only 28. That seems really young to me. You know, I've never really researched the ages of the various directors on The Twilight Zone. That might be a fun project. Who was the youngest? Who was the oldest? I'll report back if I have a chance to investigate that further. Or hey, if any proactive listener wants to take that on, let me know.
Let's pick out every idiosyncrasy of every man, woman, and child on this whole street. And then we might as well set up some kind of a kangaroo court. Now, how about a firing squad at dawn, Charlie, to get rid of all the suspects, narrow them down for you, make it easier.
Claude Akins is rock solid as the authoritative Steve Brand, and we'll see him again in Season 3 for The Little People, where he'll be the captain of a rocket ship. See, it wasn't always the C-57D on The Twilight Zone. Akins is probably best remembered for playing Sheriff Lobo on The Dukes of Hazzard, but for some reason my brain always goes to those commercials he did in the 80s.
It's murder when food gets lodged between your dentures and gums. Ouch! Now, watch Super Polygrip. It holds so tight, it helps keep food out, dentures in.
Steve's wife Myra is played by Ann Barton, who broiled up a tasty-looking steak in Season 2's Shadow Play. Or was it actually a roast?
Now, that don't seem likely. The sky's just as blue as anything. Not a cloud, no lightning, no thunder, no nothing. How could it be a storm?
Charlie is played by Jack Weston, who will use black magic to resurrect William Shakespeare in Season 4's The Bard. And in the process, he'll commit the following crime against humanity.
Scubba-dubba-doo, I love you. Put me on the stage, I'll be arrayed. Scubba-dubba-doo, scubba-dubba-doo. Julius Moomer will play for you. Racky sack, I'm flush.
That was for you, Fred and John. You're welcome. Let's see, what else we got?
Just keep your distance, all of you. Okay, so I've got a car that starts by itself. Well, it's a freak thing, I admit it, but what's it make me, a criminal or something?
Les Goodman is played by Barry Atwater. This is his only Twilight Zone, but he had a very memorable turn as an innocent scientist taken over by an evil rock parasite on the Outer Limits.
Listener, I must kill you. You are a danger to us. You may think now that it is your own madness, but you're too rational a man to remain irrational for long.
So I guess over on ABC, Les was the monster. The episode is Corpus Earthling, and it's probably one of my top 5 favorite Outer Limits episodes ever. If not top 5, definitely top 10. And speaking of the Outer Limits, well, stay tuned. Details as they develop. Also, Jason Johnson plays a background character without a name, unless his name is in fact Man, which is how his character is listed on IMDb. He'll be featured more prominently in the Season 2 episode The Lateness of the Hour as the robot butler Jensen. Hey, he actually did play a character named Man with 2 N's in an episode of The Fugitive called Wine is the Traitor, which, I don't know, like my mom used to say, wine's fine, but liquor's quicker. That's not a joke, by the way. I actually heard my mom say that multiple times as I grew up. Not sure if it's funny or deeply disturbing. Mom, if you're listening, call in and explain yourself. Let's see. Oh, and finally there's Mary Gregory, who plays Tommy's mom, Sally, but we'll come back to her. Now, I first saw The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street in my early teens. I was an actor, a quote-unquote thespian in those days, so I really appreciated the interplay between the characters and the performances, all of which are quite good. But I didn't experience any particular connection with the episode. This has remained the case throughout several viewings across over 30 years. It's always been a really good episode, and that's it. And then I watched it in 2017, and it's an entirely different deal this time. Now, I'd love to say I'm not going to get political. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to get socio-political. Who are we as a society now, today, in the current climate? Are we cool-headed and pragmatic like Steve, or are we quick to judge and almost eager for confrontation like Charlie? Just look at the gleeful vitriol that's slathered all over the internet like a thick smear of excrement. Look at your Facebook feed. You know, it used to be a fun, easy way to connect and keep track of your friends and your family with a minimum of effort. Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. But now, it's a constant barrage of opposing views and condescension. Oh, you're a Trump supporter? You're a redneck zealot. Oh, you voted for Hillary? You're a snowflake libtard. It seems we're made up of a lot more Charlies than Steves, and that's on both ends of the party spectrum. It's as if we collectively waited for a perfect storm of government upheaval and civic unrest and just fucking pounced on it. At this point in history, it seems entirely possible that a Maple Street type scenario could play out in real life, and all of our resentments and fears of anyone different from ourselves could propel us right past that dreaded point of no return.
As God is my witness, you're letting something begin here that's a nightmare.
Part of the Twilight Zone's enduring appeal is its timelessness. The monsters are due on Maple Street, with a tweak here and an updated hairstyle there, could have been written today. It's like Serling knew that no matter how enlightened man becomes, there will always be something simmering just below the surface, something decidedly less civilized, more primitive, less ruminative, more prone to acting impulsively, a primal beast just waiting to come out and display its caveman mentality proudly for all to see. Not just the redneck zealots, not just the snowflake libtards, all of us, every single one of us. Given the proper stimulation and prodding, anyone can become a bigot, a murderer, a monster, not just on Maple Street, but anywhere.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it. If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist. If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, or organizations labeled communist by the Department of Justice, she may be a communist. If a person defends the activities of communist nations while consistently attacking the domestic and foreign policy of the United States, she may be a communist. If a person does all these things over a period of time, he must be a communist. But there are other communists who don't show their real faces, who work more silently.
The idea that any story about an alien invasion from the 50s and 60s is actually a veiled commentary on communism, the Red Menace, the Red Scare, isn't a new one. It's kind of been done to death. Now, I'm a huge fan of the original 1956 Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is frequently cited as a metaphor for communist infiltration. But see, I wasn't around during that time, so I don't really connect it to that. Supposedly the author of the original book, Jack Finney, who we talked about when we covered Walking Distance, didn't intend that, nor did the makers of the film. But at that time, fears of communist infiltration ran rampant, so critics and viewers latched onto the film as a crystallization of those fears. So which is more valid, the intent of the artist, or the interpretation of the art by its audience? Both, and neither. One of the beauties of art, painting or sculpture or music or literature or film, is that it invites each of us to observe it through our own lens. Now, Obviously, the less abstract something is, the less wiggle room you have. In analyzing something more concrete, like a narrative story, you run the risk of reading too much into it and seeing things that maybe aren't really there. A couple weeks ago, when we talked about And When the Sky Was Open, I talked about parallels that I was seeing between the script and the 5 stages of grief. Plus, I went off on this weird tangent about it being a possible metaphor for depression and suicide. And yes, I was absolutely reading too much into it. I'm 100% sure Serling wasn't thinking about any of that. But that reflects back on me, not Serling. It doesn't make me wrong. There's no wrong answer when it comes to how art affects us. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. One man's trash is another man's treasure. He who smelt it, dealt it. And a whole bunch of other cliches too. My point? Maybe Serling was thinking about communism and maybe he wasn't. My generation and the generation since didn't grow up under a constant barrage of anti-commie propaganda, so it doesn't really hit us that way. It's just a story about aliens taking over the world and how easy stupid humans make it for them.
Seems the general impression now holds that maybe there's a family that isn't what we think they are. Monsters from outer space or something different than us. Fifth columnists from the vast beyond.
Well, okay, so maybe. I mean, the whole point of the Twilight Zone was to give Serling a way to deliver moral messages and social commentary without sponsor or network interference. But there'd be no reason to cleverly disguise an anti-communist stance in 1960 American television, right? If anything, he'd be encouraged to blatantly denounce it on television. That's why I kind of suspect he wasn't really going for that with The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. I think it's far more likely that he was denouncing the fear that the Red Scare was causing everyone. If you let that fear consume you, then the aliens, win. You know, it still bugs me that Pete Van Horn was gone for 5 frickin' hours just walking over to the next block and back. It's really the only potential strike I have against the episode. Unless maybe he was the advanced scout for the invaders, and he'd been up on that hill giving his report to them in the air-conditioned luxury of the flying saucer. You know, one simple line could have made that work. One alien says to the other, "It's a shame our inside man had to die," or something like that. But you know, for the first time in all my viewings of this episode over the years, I actually find myself a little disappointed that the alien invasion threat turns out to be real. For me, it almost undermines the message just a little bit. The residents of Maple Street were right to freak out, to be afraid, to feel protective of their homes, their families, their way of life. I'm not condoning their actions, but at least some of them seem a bit more understandable, maybe. You're in a dark place, and you believe your family is in jeopardy. Someone or something is coming toward you. A gun is pressed into your sweaty grip. Are you going to wait and ask questions? Or are you going to pull the trigger? I'm sure we'd all like to say yes. Of course we'd think it through and make absolutely sure. But then, we've never really been in that situation, have we? Shit happens. Sometimes really heavy shit when we're confused and afraid. I think the episode would have been even stronger if some other and much more benign culprit was to blame.
Sure, that's the kind of thing, like sunspots. They raise Cain with radio reception all over the world. This thing being so close is no telling the sort of stuff it can do.
Sure. Or some kind of electromagnetic pulse accidentally unleashed at a nearby military base. Or something. It doesn't have to be aliens. However, I do have to hand it to those aliens. What a genius way to take over the Earth. No armada of warships, no incinerating lasers, no parasitic body snatching, no time traveling into Earth's distant past to interrupt the rise of man. Just good old-fashioned parlor tricks and misdirection. Those aliens are the David Blaines of the universe. And you know, speaking of the military...
You're traveling to another dimension. But dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are only that of the imagination. You're entering the Twilight Zone.
We all know that CBS brought back the Twilight Zone in the mid-'80s for a fairly short-lived modern series, which was uneven as hell, but sometimes very good. What you may not know is that there was another, even more recent Twilight Zone series, even shorter-lived. It debuted in 2002 and only ran for one season on UPN, and I think I watched maybe 3 or 4 episodes and gave up on it. It just didn't do anything for me. However, since I am a completist, I did pick up the DVD set at some point, but I've never cracked it open. Until now. Remember that remake of The After Hours from a few weeks back? Remember how completely unnecessary it was? The UPN Twilight Zone revival remade a total of 3 classic episodes during its run. Eye of the Beholder, which is even ballsier than the After Hours remake. And yes, it's equally pointless. They did It's a Good Life. Well, they actually didn't remake that. They made a sequel to it. They brought back Bill Mumy and Cloris Leachman and stuff. It's called It's Still a Good Life. And that one's actually pretty good. And they remade The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. They dropped the "do" though, so it's just The Monsters Are on Maple Street. It aired on February 13th, 2003. The Steve of the piece is Will, played by Andrew McCarthy, the same Andrew McCarthy who played Blaine in Pretty in Pink.
I was with you. I had a great time. If I was in a Turkish prison, I'd have a great time with you.
It's too weird for me, you know. Maybe this shouldn't happen.
What, you and me? You know, maybe it doesn't happen all the time, but doesn't mean it isn't right, right? Doesn't mean you can't try.
Blaine? His name is Blaine? Oh, that's a major appliance. That's not a name.
The Charlie of the piece is Dylan, played by Titus Welliver, the same Titus Welliver who played the Man in Black, aka the Smoke Monster, on TV's Lost.
They come, fight, they destroy, they corrupt. It always ends the same.
This new version starts out with the Maple Street residents having their monthly homeowners club meeting or whatever upper middle class white suburban people belong to. Okay, I'm a white suburban person, but I'm not money enough to belong to anything like that. I rent, for Christ's sakes. Anyway, the White Privilege Society, yes, I'm calling them that even though there's a black guy and an Asian guy, is fussing over first world problems, and the seething intolerance almost immediately rears its ugly head.
Well, that family's a weird bunch. Did you guys notice they were the only ones on the block that did not fly a flag on Veterans Day?
They just moved in, Dylan. Maybe they hadn't unpacked their flag yet.
Come on, Will. There were plenty of flags on sale down at Home Depot. They could have picked one up.
American flag, check. Home Depot, check. Yep. This is straight up Murica right here. Suddenly, everybody's cell phones start ringing at once, and some kind of powerful electromagnetic pulse hits the neighborhood and kills the power. Cell phones are dead, cars won't start, etc.
This is just like ID4, Independence Day, the movie with Will Smith. Aliens invade the world and blow everything up.
And that's the Tommy of the piece, now named Jason. And by the way, this is the only time anybody even mentions aliens as the possible culprit. Well, I mean the extraterrestrial kind of aliens.
There's a difference between watchful and paranoid. And people are getting reported to the government for buying pita bread.
Maybe they should be reported. I mean, has somebody been paying attention when Timothy McVeigh bought all that fertilizer?
Explain to me how buying pita bread is going to help you make an explosive device.
It's not how they use it. It's that they use it. My opinion, shows, they're not from here.
Oh, man. Yeah, this is definitely a 21st century take on Serling's story. And this aired 14 years ago during the height of the post 9/11, whatever the post 9/11 equivalent of the Red Scare was. And it's It's even timelier today, isn't it? So the prevailing theory is terrorists, not surprisingly. Dylan points out that the new neighbors across the street never even came outside when all the power went out. And they still haven't.
Come on, open the damn door. What the hell are you doing in there?
Would that make you open the door?
Now, we know someone's inside. We saw them peep through the blinds, but they don't answer the door. Night falls. Will's wife voices her suspicion about the new neighbors.
It is weird how they hole up in there.
I just want to be left alone, sweetie. It's still a free country.
I know that. Stop acting so smug like you're the only one that knows what's going on. No wonder we don't fit in here. You act so above everyone.
You want to fit in with people like Phyllis, who's afraid to do anything unless it's approved by a military committee, or Dylan, who's afraid his sperm count will drop if he actually used his brain for 5 minutes?
Zing! Meanwhile, outside, the sperm-challenged Dylan is getting the rest of the neighbors all riled up.
I thought we were going to be doing something useful. Setting up a perimeter, finding weapons, getting ready to defend ourselves, protect our families.
We don't know yet if we are under attack.
If we haven't been attacked, then where is everybody? And why are they just leaving us here to fend for ourselves?
Will heads outside to try to defuse him.
They got their hands full of ground zero. The rest of us are left on our own. Nobody's coming!
I thought you were gonna help.
Stop patronizing me!
You idiot, you are scaring everyone.
What did you call me?
You don't want me to think you're a jerk, then stop acting like one.
Dylan takes a swing at Will and misses. Will swings back and doesn't.
Let's get ready to rumble!
As Dylan and Will get to wrestling, there's a bright light. A lone SUV drives by slowly and pulls into the garage at the new neighbor's house. Then the lights in their house come on. Somehow this one single house has power. Dylan pulls out a pistol.
That's it. Come on up there.
Put the gun away. I'll go talk to them.
They didn't let you in the last time you tried.
Well, I won't leave until they talk to me this time. Look, I don't think they're terrorists, but I'm sure we'd all feel a lot better with some answers.
Will goes back to the house and knocks. This time somebody answers the door, and from a distance, the neighbors watch as Will enters the house. We see their silhouettes as they talk inside.
I think I should go over there.
Give them a minute, they're just talking.
Seem awful friendly to me.
Will comes back outside with an explanation.
Look, everything's fine. He's not a terrorist. He works on the night shift for an electronics firm. The family has a plan that if there's trouble, if there's a problem, he's not home, they don't open the door.
What about the car? What about the electricity?
They don't know about it. They don't know why that is. But look, just because they have a car that works and electricity doesn't make him a terrorist. Look, they offered to come outside. I told them not to. Not in this environment.
You what?
Dylan shoves his pistol in Will's face.
You know what, Marshall? You are real quick to defend those people. Are you one of us or one of them?
You think I'm a terrorist? Huh? Do you? You think I'm a terrorist? Who's the one with the gun? Who's the one that's been inciting people from the beginning? Who's the one with an intricate knowledge of every terrorist bombing? This is exactly what the terrorists want, for us to mistrust each other. We were in this together, and now we're ready to rip each other's heads off. They haven't set a foot in the neighborhood, and they've won. Dylan, if you want to shoot, go ahead. When this is over, you're going to be accountable.
Jason breaks up the tension.
Hey, Dad.
What?
Come here, look.
He points to their house. There's a small electronic object hanging near the garage. Dylan pulls it down.
It's a spy camera on my house. The guy over there works at an electronics firm. He works at night. He's out here on the street while we're all asleep. He's the only one that would have done this.
Yeah, there might be more.
Holly.
If it's us or them, let it be them.
You said we wouldn't be like this, Holly.
Things are different now.
Hey, I just found this device. Wedged under the shutters. Wanna bet they've bugged the phones too?
They're coming out of there, Marshall, one way or another.
The mob heads over to the new neighbor's house, armed with shovels and crutches and a can of gasoline. Oh, and in a hilarious nod to the Universal horror films of old, a torch. I mean, granted, it's a tiki torch, but it's still technically a torch. It counts. They descend upon the house, and in moments, the place is ablaze. In the chaos, Will takes a blow to the head, and as he watches with blood streaming down his face, his neighbors revel in the destruction like animals. We cut to a military surveillance truck watching by remote camera.
So, in the event of a perceived terrorist attack, isolated communities will sustain themselves for 5 hours.
Do you think they meant to leave the power on at that one house?
Beats me. I'll tell you one thing, if the other civilian security tests went like this, we're all in trouble.
So the whole neighborhood is being subjected to a military experiment to gauge how American citizens might respond to a terrorist attack. So if this doesn't represent any kind of actual threat, and it doesn't look like anybody got killed, what happens now? Does the military step in at some point and defuse the situation? What does that debriefing look like? And how does this group of people coexist going forward? Well, actually, everyone but Will, including Will's wife, went crazy together, so they might all be fine. But Will? He remained the sole voice of reason up till the bitter end and refused to participate in the violence. I imagine he's going to divorce his wife, move the hell away from Maple Street, and then go track down Molly Ringwald and ride off into a John Hughes-style sunset. Like any attempt at remaking classic Twilight Zones, it's a foregone conclusion that it's not gonna outshine the original. There's just no way. I mean, maybe if they tried remaking a crappy episode, and there are several crappy episodes throughout the show's original 5-year run, but not the classics. Not the recognizable, iconic, unforgettable classics. Granted, now this isn't one of the more egregious examples, but the best that this updated Monsters Are Not do on Maple Street can hope for is to be a really small footnote, and that is all that it achieves. But the original Monsters Are Due on Maple Street is pretty great. I mean, it's not one of my personal all-time favorites, but I respect it a great deal. It's well written, well acted, really well staged and shot. You know, if I have to nitpick anything, I mean, other than the Pete Van Horn being gone for 5 hours thing, the original music score by Renee Garriguenc bugs me just a little bit. It's a bit too, I don't know, jaunty? It's almost cartoony in spots. And I don't know if that's intentional. Maybe it's to soften the inherent darkness of the proceedings and make it less disturbing on a subconscious level. But for me anyway, it does create a bit of a disconnect. A red wine with fish kind of vibe. Here, I threw together a quick supercut. Okay, that last one isn't really part of the score. Just making sure you're paying attention. Now, it's interesting to note that none of the cues from this score were ever reused on the Twilight Zone, which is weird since most original scores, or at least parts of them, would resurface in later episodes. Time Enough at Last is another one like that, but that's a different conversation for a different podcast episode. Fast forward now to September 29th, 1961. The Twilight Zone is just a few weeks into its third season when it unveils The Shelter, another Rod Serling original that treads some, shall we say, familiar ground. We have a suburban neighborhood, the occupants of which seem to live more or less harmoniously, but as we'll see, it's a thin, rather brittle facade. So it's evening on Maple Street. Well, okay, it's not really Maple Street, but it sure looks like it. The exteriors were shot on Lot 2 at MGM Studios, which is where The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street was shot. I mean, it could be Maple Street. We never see a street sign. We pan in close to one of the houses. Speaking of inappropriately bouncy music, it sounds like a flippin' sitcom. I mean, I get it. It's cluing us in that it's somebody's birthday, but it's completely unnecessary since the very next shot is a close-up of a half-eaten birthday cake. Now, the birthday boy is Dr. William Stockton, and his neighbors are celebrating him by boozing it up and making speeches. Good old Jerry Harlow takes a turn, working in a jab about Doc Stockton keeping his neighbors up nights while he builds his bomb shelter. I wonder if that's meant to foreshadow something. And then the festivities screech to a halt.
4 minutes ago, the President of the United States made the following...
But wait, hang on. Right before that announcement starts, I mean like right before, there's something going on in the background. Let's zoom in for a closer listen.
You know that because your mom won't let me have any more.
That's Frank Henderson's wife, Mary, who apparently overindulged and has just been cut off. And holy shit, it's Tommy's mom, Sally, from The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. So maybe this is Maple Street after all. Okay, so Sally was the last survivor of the all-night Battle Royale-style massacre, but she remained on Maple Street and eventually got remarried, but now she's an alcoholic because of her intense survivor's guilt. Okay, dumb theory, because what happened to the aliens? But that is the same actress, Mary Gregory, and we've actually seen her before. She played Nelda, the robot maid, in The Lateness of the Hour.
There's a good girl. Will that be all, ma'am?
Yes, thank you, Nelda. Good night.
Good night, ma'am.
4 minutes ago, the President of the United States made the following announcement. I quote, "At 11:04 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, both our distant early warning line and ballistics early warning line reported radar evidence of unidentified flying objects flying due southeast. As of this moment, we have been unable to determine the nature of these objects, but for the time being, in the interest of national safety, we are declaring a state of yellow alert. The Civil Defense Authorities request that if you have a shelter already prepared, go there at once."
So the neighbors split and run for their respective homes. Mary, leaves with her drink still in her hand, which means Mrs. Stockton's glassware set is now missing a piece. Thanks a lot, lush lady. This brief scene is a nice throwback to the chaos of The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, but these folks aren't running around trying to kill each other. They're just running home to figure out what the hell they're going to do about the onslaught of missiles heading their way. Doc Stockton, Mrs. Stockton, and their son Polly start moving emergency supplies into their bomb shelter. The missus is pretty close to losing her shit.
Now, if it is a bomb, there's no assurance it'll land near us. And if it doesn't,
But if it does, Bill, New York is only 40 miles away. And New York's going to get it. We know that. So we'll get it, too. All of it. The poison, the radiation, the whole mess. We'll get it.
We'll be in a shelter, Grace. And with any luck at all, we'll survive. We've got food and water enough to last us for 2 weeks. Maybe even longer if we use it wisely.
Then what, Bill? Then what? We crawl out of here like gophers to tiptoe through all that rubble up above? The rubble and the ruin and the bodies of our friends? Oh, Bill, why is it so necessary to survive? What's the good of it?
And then Jerry shows up. You know, company always shows up unannounced at the least opportune times. Jerry is played by Jack Albertson, who will return to play the titular genie in Season 4's I Dream of Jeannie. But he's probably best known as Charlie's Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
You're a crook. You're a cheat and a swindler. That's what you are. How can you do a thing like this? Build up a little boy's hopes and then smash all his dreams to pieces. Come on, Charlie. Let's get out of here. I'll get even with him if it's the last thing I ever do. Slugworth wants a gobstopper, he'll get one.
Can I bring Martha and the kids over here? Over here? Well, we're sitting ducks over there. Sitting ducks, we don't have any protection at all.
Oh, Jerry. You can use our basement.
Your basement? What about your shelter? We've got to get into a shelter. It's the only place we can survive.
I don't have any room, Jerry. There's not near enough room or supplies or anything. It's designed for 3 people.
Well, we'll bring our own food. We'll bring our own water. We'll sleep standing up if necessary. Please, Bill, you've got to help me. I've got to keep my family alive. We won't use any of your stuff.
What about air? That's a 10-by-10 room, Jerry, with an air filter designed to supply 3 people. Will you bring your own air?
Well, just give us a chance.
No.
48 hours, Bill, then we'll get out.
When that door gets closed and locked, it stays closed and locked, Jerry. There'll be radiation and heaven knows what else. Oh, I'm sorry, Jerry. As God is my witness, I am sorry. But I built that for my family.
Well, what about mine? What do we do? Just rock on the front porch and burn to a crisp?
That's no concern of mine. Right now, at this given moment, it's my family I have to worry about.
The doc slams the shelter door. Just then, another neighbor, Marty, shows up with his wife and kids.
Bill, it's Marty. We've got the kids with us.
Please let us in.
Marty, I would if I could. I swear to you I would.
Bill, please. Please, Bill.
I can't, Marty. Don't stand there asking me. I can't and I won't.
I feel sorry for you then, Bill. I really do. You probably will survive, but you'll have blood on your hands. You're a doctor! You're supposed to help people!
The rest of the partygoers arrive and argue about what to do. Jerry's got a good idea.
I'll tell you what we ought to do. We ought to find one basement to go to work on that. Pool all of our stuff, food, water, everything.
But the others apparently saw the monsters are due on Maple Street and completely missed the lesson.
I tell you, it just isn't fair. He's down there in a bomb shelter, perfectly safe, while our kids have to sit around and wait for a bomb to drop.
Why don't we just go down to his basement and break down the door?
Frank, wait a minute, Frank! Frank, wait a minute! We can't all fit in that bomb shelter. We'd be crazy to even try.
Why don't we pick out one family? Draw lots of something.
What difference would it make? I keep telling you, he won't let anybody in.
Well, we could all go down there and tell him he's got the whole street against him. We could do that.
What good would it do? I keep telling you, even if you'll break down the door, we can't all fit in that bomb shelter. We'd be killing everybody and for no reason.
It saves the life of even one of my kids. I call that good reason.
Now, Maple Street was exclusively waspy, so they never had to contend with race, religion, etc. Not the case here.
Jerry, you know him better than any of us. You're his best friend. Go down there again. Talk to him. Plead with him. Tell him to pick out one family. We'll draw lots or something.
One family? Meaning yours, Marty, huh?
Why not? I've got a 3-month-old baby.
What difference does that make? Is your baby any more precious than one of my kids?
I never said that. Look, if you're going to argue about who deserves to live more than the next one...
You shut your mouth, wife! That's the way it is when the foreigners come over here. Pushy, grabby, semi-Americans!
Another neighbor shows up and offers his 2 cents.
Why don't we get some kind of battering ram?
Yeah, we could go over to Bennett Avenue. Phil Klein has some heavy pipe in his basement. I've seen it.
No. That would get him into the act, too. And who cares about saving him? No. If we do that, we'll let all those people know that we have a shelter on our street. We'd have a whole mob to contend with, a whole bunch of strangers.
Sure, what right have they got to come over here? This isn't their street. This isn't their shelter.
Jerry must have seen the monsters are due on Maple Street too, and he's retro auditioning for the part of Steve.
Oh, this is our shelter. And on the next street, that's another country. Patronize home industries. You idiots, you fools, you're insane, all of you.
Maybe you don't want to live, Jerry. Maybe you don't care.
Believe me, I care. I want to see the morning sun come up, too. But you're acting like a mob, and a mob doesn't have any brains. You're proving it by what you're doing.
And then Marty throws his hat into the Steve ring, too.
Wait a minute. I agree with Jerry. We should stop and think a minute.
Nobody cares what you think, you or your kind. I thought I made it clear upstairs.
Yes, but I think that Jerry
I think the first order of business is to get you out of here.
Marty Weiss is played by Joseph Bernard. This is his only Twilight Zone, but genre fans may recognize him as Tark from the Star Trek episode Wolf in the Fold. Frank Henderson is played by Sandy Kenyon, who did 2 other Twilight Zones, Season 4's Valley of the Shadow, which we'll probably never get around to, and Season 2's The Odyssey of Flight 33, which we will get to at some point. He also showed up on The Outer Limits in a pretty silly episode called Counterweight.
I must warn you against depression. It's caused mostly by the isolation, the monotony. We're coming into dangerous times now.
Okay, so the menfolk get the aforementioned heavy pipe, and all 5 of them... Wait, all 5? That's right. Jerry and Marty have apparently joined the angry mob in a disappointing display of wishy-washiness. So much for their voice of reason aspirations. They drag their makeshift battering ram through the Stockton house, bull in a china shop style, breaking shit left and right as they go, and then they go to work on that fallout shelter door. All logic and reason is gone. Like the residents of Maple Street before them, Doc Stockton's friends and neighbors have been reduced to animals. And just as they force their way inside the shelter...
Remain tuned for an important message. The President of the United States has just announced that the previously unidentified objects have now been definitely ascertained as being satellites. They are harmless, and we are in no danger. The state of emergency has officially been called off. We are in no danger. Repeat, there is no enemy attack.
Well, this is awkward.
Marty? Marty? I went off my rocker. You can understand that, can't you? I just went off my rocker. I didn't mean any of those things I said to you. Well, we were all of us so scared, so confused. Well, it's no wonder, is it? I mean, you can understand why we all blew our tops a little.
Am I the only one who wants Marty to kick Frank in his narrow-minded, intolerant balls right about now? Well, he doesn't. He instead suggests that they all have a block party to celebrate not getting nuked into oblivion. No hard feelings, I guess. Well, maybe Doc Stockton's not so cool with everything that just went down.
Damages? I wonder if any one of us has any idea what those damages really are. Maybe one of them is finding out what we're really like when we're normal. The kind of people we are, just underneath the skin. I mean all of us. A lot of naked, wild animals who put such a price on staying alive that they'll claw their neighbors to death just for the privilege. We were spared a bomb tonight, but I wonder if we weren't destroyed even without it.
So nobody got killed or trampled, or blown away with a shotgun, but this pocket of civilization, this formerly tight-knit group of friends and neighbors, they're kind of shattered nevertheless. Now, when I covered the shelter in my blog back in 2011 on its 50th anniversary, I wrote the following. The Shelter, written by Rod Serling and directed by Lamont Johnson, has all the hallmarks of a classic Serling script. Crisis, the possibility of a nuclear attack, moral dilemma, only one family on the block has a bomb shelter, and a preachy indictment of man's tendency to act badly in the face of adversity. The rest of the neighborhood wants access to the bomb shelter and isn't interested in taking no for an answer. What's missing? Well, there's virtually zero supernatural or fantasy trappings. In fact, this is the 3rd straight TZ episode that lacks an overt divergence from reality. But that's not an automatic deal breaker. What is a deal breaker is the fact that Serling already told this same story back in Season 1's The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. The unseen menace there was a presumed alien invasion, but the basic story, in which neighbors turn on one another, is essentially the same. Serling's idea well seems to have run dry, so he's pilfering earlier episodes for ideas. It's a disappointing trend that will continue throughout the rest of the series. Now, great, even brilliant Serling-penned episodes are still to come, but consistent quality is no longer guaranteed. The glory days of the first 2 seasons are clearly over. Having said all that, the shelter is by no means terrible. It's just stale, predictable. Maybe it was more shocking and relevant in 1961, given the political climate. My mom remembers lying awake at night when she was young, scared half out of her mind that Russia would launch its missiles. Even as late as my own childhood in the 70s and early 80s, all-out nuclear war was a real and vivid possibility. Remember that 80s movie, The Day After? I was in 7th grade when that aired, and let me tell you, that thing scared the shit out of me. Fast forward 30 years. How often does the concept of World War III even cross our minds? The world is a different place now. My kids, who are now transitioning into adulthood, have never lived in fear of a nuclear holocaust. The more plausible threat to their way of life? A complete economic collapse followed by worldwide Chinese rule. Okay, so I wrote that in 2001. Obviously, the political climate has shifted some, but otherwise, do I still feel the same 6 years in the future? Honestly, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it is kind of a rehash, but I think I respect it more than I did in the past. See, I never really considered it from a contextual or a historical standpoint.
T-5, T-4.
The sound you are hearing is the final countdown to an experimental atomic blast, the most awesome, devastating power known to mankind.
Radioactive fallout, that deadly byproduct of a nuclear attack, will kill literally millions of unprotected families in the event of an atomic attack. Is your family protected? Do you have a fallout shelter?
Now, Survival Shelters offer an economic, do-it-yourself fallout shelter.
Constructed of combination steel and concrete block and civil defense approved, a Survival Shelter can be assembled in a weekend's time.
Put your time to good use. Assemble a fallout shelter that can save your family from deadly nuclear fallout.
See a Survival Shelter today.
The shelter aired smack in the middle of a surge in public interest in civil defense in response to escalating tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Shortly after the episode aired, President John F. Kennedy started recommending that Americans start building bomb shelters.
Obviously, you cannot build a shelter in the accepted sense of the word for the kind of money which we have talked about, but we can provide directions whereby a family can take steps to protect themselves on a minimum basis and give them, members of the family, some hope that if they're out of the blast area, they could survive the fallout. And by the middle of November, we hope to suggest some of the steps that every homeowner could take. My own feeling is that these shelters are most useful and most important. And we're going to live through a long period of constant tension with these dangerous weapons which will be proliferating. And therefore, anything that we can do to increase the chances of protection for our families ought to be done.
A few weeks after the episode aired, Serling talked about it on Bob Crane's radio show on KXN CBS Radio in Los Angeles.
We promised 13 different people this morning we would ask you this question about a Twilight Zone that was on about a month or so ago. It was concerning fallout shelters. Now, on this, you must have had quite a bit of reaction.
We had 1,300 letters and cards inside of 2 days. I think we hit some kind of a nerve. It was a show called The Shelter about a doctor who had, the only guy in the neighborhood who had the presence of mind and the foresight to build a shelter.
Yeah.
And when there's a yellow alert sounding, why, he runs into the shelter with his wife and child, and all the neighbors are left high and dry. And they turn into animals. And I used this show. I wrote it because I felt, number one, it had great immediacy. We've been talking at home, my wife and me, about the possibility of building a shelter.
Yeah.
And we were struck with the moral and ethical problem of what would happen if, there were an alert sounding.
Yeah.
We got into our shelter happily because we built one, and neighbors with children came to the door and said, please let us in. Well, that was the problem. I can't answer it. I don't know what is the ethical rightness and justice of this. I haven't figured it out yet.
It is a very controversial thing because I saw a panel discussion just about a week or so ago on this, and they had some learned men on the panel, one gentleman with civil defense, another who was in the clergy, Catholic priest, a Jesuit priest, and they all had different opinions. One gentleman said in particular, until the government starts building them themselves public shelters, I can't see where there's this immediacy is here. You know, why should I go out and spend $2,000 or $3,000 to build one if the government isn't bothering? This was his feeling on it. So I can imagine when I saw your show that night, which was this problem in its most dramatic terms. Here was a family in their shelter, as you said, and here were the neighbors. What do? You carry a gun with you, shoot them off, or what do you do? And your show finally ended. How did it ended now with? It was a false alarm.
It was a yellow alert, which turned out to be nothing. But I think the essence of our philosophical comment at the end was that for the human race to survive, it has to remain civilized.
Now, was that the ending that you wanted to take, or did you want to leave it a little bit stronger than
No, because I'm not one of those, quote, knowledgeable men, Bob. I don't know. I was up in the air about it, morally and ethically. I didn't know how to end that thing. I didn't know what position, philosophically, I could take.
Side note, I got so excited when I found that clip. And as I was preparing to record this, it occurred to me that maybe, just maybe, I ought to go check and see if Tom Elliot used it on his podcast when he covered The Shelter recently, which I hadn't listened to yet at that point. Now, my general rule is to not include dramatic readings of specific stories if Tom already did them, or run the same vintage radio shows that he has, partly out of respect, but partly out of my own neurotic desire to differentiate my show from his show as much as possible. Not just his show, all the Twilight Zone podcasts out there. But I wouldn't typically sweat short clips. I mean, there's inevitably going to be some overlap between two podcasts covering the exact same thing. Now, for some reason, this particular clip really stuck out as something I wanted to be the first to present. I thought I'd unearthed a rare and heretofore unexploited gem. But god damn it, of course he used it, because, well, why wouldn't he? But still, you bastard, Tom, you beat me to it. I mean, I obviously still used it, but I did cut mine down some. So folks, if you want to hear the full uncut clip, head over to the Twilight Zone podcast with Tom Elliot and have at it. The link will be in the show notes.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, with the strains of Getting Sentimental Over You, Tommy Dorsey and his orchestra bid you all a very pleasant good night, direct from the Princeton campus in a broadcast of the Summer Swing Festival. And listen to that applause.
That's Bob Crane again, but it's not from his radio show. It's actually from a Twilight Zone episode. He's the announcer heard on the time-bending radio in the Season 2 episode Static, which aired almost exactly 1 year before The Shelter. Bob Crane would eventually leave radio for television, but not as an announcer, as an actor. You probably know him best from Hogan's Heroes. We'll talk more about Bob Crane and his tragically short life if and when we ever get around to covering Static. The Shelter does not feature an original music score. Rather, existing cues were selected by the series' musical director, Lud Gluskin, from the vast and possibly bottomless CBS Music Library. Most stock-scored episodes feature cues by various composers from various sources. However, almost every cue heard in The Shelter was composed by Robert Drasnin from a suite called Serling. Robert Drasnin is also responsible for one of my all-time favorite Exotica LPs, 1959's Voodoo, exotic music from Polynesia and the Far East. He recorded a follow-up in 2007, Voodoo 2, which is equally wonderful, plus a posthumous third Voodoo volume just came out in June. Now, Drasnin isn't typically named among Exotica luminaries like Les Baxter and Martin Denny, presumably because of his relatively slim contribution to the genre, but what he did give us is simply marvelous. And he's actually my go-to when I need to get myself into a rum and Kahlua pork state of mind. Now, the 80s Twilight Zone didn't remake The Shelter, but they did produce an episode that definitely evoked it. Shelter Skelter first aired May 21st, 1987, near the end of the show's network run. Meet Harry Dobbs. He's a gun store owner and survivalist type who is obsessed with the secret bomb shelter that he's built underneath his house. He basically ignores his wife Sally and his daughter Deidre. His only meaningful family interaction is trying to imprint his gun-loving paramilitary inclinations onto his 7-year-old son, Jason. And if Deidre looks a little familiar to you, that's because you probably know her as Winnie Cooper from The Wonder Years. That's Danica McKellar. Harry and Sally have a bit of a tiff, so Sally packs up the kids for a weekend trip to her sister's. It seems like this is a pretty regular occurrence. Harry's friend and employee Nick shows up with the day's receipts from the gun store, and he seems a little bit worried about something.
Hey, have you heard the news about this Middle Eastern thing? Oh, it's getting scary.
The President and First Lady did indeed leave the White House by military helicopter half an hour ago. Toman refused to disclose their destination, nor would he confirm that their departure has anything to do with the escalating crisis in the Middle East.
Side note, that newscaster is rocking an awesome 80s do, and she's got shoulder pads for days. Nothing dates a film faster than 80s fashion. Kind of makes me want to go dig out my old Miami Vice-inspired outfits from high school.
I tell you, Nick, I almost long for it.
What?
The bomb. Sometimes I dream about it. Afterwards, starting over with my son in a purified world. In a world with all the scum burned off of it, with everything basic and simple.
Yeah, but you'd have to survive a nuclear war now. There's not much chance of that now, is there?
Oh, it can be done if you plan on it.
You mean build a fallout shelter or something like that?
Fallout shelter wouldn't be enough. Not here. Dunston's only 4.5 miles from Wakefield Air Base, a prime target. Any shelter'd have to be deep and blast-proof. We've known each other since high school. You've been working in my gun store for 10 years. Hell, you're practically a part of the family. I think you deserve to be let in on a little family secret.
Harry, this is amazing. How did you do this and still keep it a secret?
Remember when I had the pool put in? Oh, no. That was my cover. I hired people from out of state. While half of them tore up the backyard, I had the rest of them dig this out. I told them it was for a wine cellar.
A wine cellar?
You? They were illegals. What did they know?
You dick.
No one knows it's here, not even my neighbors. Especially not my neighbors. My family. And now you are the only ones that know about this. And we're sworn to secrecy. Do you understand, Nick?
Yeah, Harry. I'm just flattered you'd let me in on it.
I'm betting Harry saw The Shelter on late-night TV, and that's why he is so determined to keep his shelter a secret. The international situation escalates. Harry races upstairs and places a call to Sally, demanding that she and the kids get home ASAP.
Have you been watching the news? I want you to pack up the car and come home.
Are you crazy? We'd be driving half the night.
The whole country's about to blow up. I want you here.
Harry, every time there's a minor international crisis, you think we should barricade ourselves in the family tomb.
Listen, if you're not out of there in the next 5 minutes...
You're drunk, aren't you?
No! Sally, wait, look! Send Jason back home. Put my son in a cab and send him back. I don't care what it costs.
He's afraid of you, Harry. He's staying here.
Sally!
And just then, as if the universe is perhaps smiting him for being such a shitty husband and father, a bright light flashes and everything catches fire. He races downstairs and just makes it inside the shelter as the shockwave hits.
This is it! I gotta get home. My parents.
Nick, you need me. Nick!
I gotta get home.
Nick! Stop! Listen! Listen, you're not going anywhere! It was a direct hit on the air base! Listen to me! We're gonna have to stay down here until the radiation levels drop! At least a month! Look!
No!
Look, Nick!
Weeks go by. The radiation count is high. One day, Harry and Nick hear sounds from above.
Hey, Harry! There's someone up there. Someone's coming to rescue us.
Don't be ridiculous. Look at the radiation level outside. It's the walking dead up there. Survivors looking for food and water. You better pray that they don't find us. And I'm ready for them if they do.
Months go by. The radiation count remains high. Nick grows increasingly despondent, much to Harry's chagrin.
Gatland, you haven't got the guts or will to survive. I'm sorry I didn't realize that before I asked you in.
What the hell is the point of surviving in a dead world?
A better world, you'll see.
I doubt it. You come to hate everything eventually, Harry. I don't even know why I'm trying to stay alive.
That's simple. You're afraid to die. You've always been afraid of everything. I should have known better. For years, I gave you work. I took you on hunting trips. I tried to make a man out of you. It's not possible.
Dick! You're right. You're right. And now all I have to do is to find the guts to choose how I want to die and who I want to die with.
So Nick leaves the shelter when Harry's not looking, but returns later with radiation sickness and begs Harry to let him back in.
God, Harry, it's horrible. There's no daylight anymore. It's freezing. There's nothing but mountains of garbage. The whole town is gone. I've been crawling around for hours waiting for the sunlight, and it never comes. The air smells like burnt plastic. I feel sick, Harry. Let me in.
I can't. You're contaminated. If I let you in, you'd only kill us both. I'm sorry, Nick. It was your decision.
No! I didn't mean it, Harry! So help me God, please! If you let me in, I'll be fine! Please, Harry! Please let me in!
Yeah, Harry definitely saw the shelter. Unfortunately, he learned the wrong lessons from it. So more time passes. The radiation count never seems to go down. Harry remains inside the shelter, cleaning his guns and vanishing deeper into his survivalist fantasy. We are then shown the world outside the shelter, a slow pan across the scorched, ashen ruins of the city, blanketed in perpetual darkness. We eventually reach a kind of curved surface, beyond which is a lush green park. We hear the sound of children playing.
It's been a year since the tragic accident at Wakefield Air Base. That horrifying day when one of our own nuclear cruise missiles detonated without warning in the bomb bay of a B-1 bomber as it was preparing to take off, instantly leveling the small town of Dunston, Kansas. The world will never forget the shock, destruction, the appalling loss of life. A shock that many now feel pulled the world back from the brink of war. When the decision was made to bulldoze the highly radioactive ruins into as compact an area as possible and seal them under this vast radiation-proof dome, no one could have foreseen how sacred a shrine it would become. For the Peace Dome, as many call it today, has become the world's most powerful and enduring monument to the utter folly of war.
Among the visitors are Sally and the kids, apparently celebrating the 1-year anniversary of their liberation from their asshole patriarch.
Mommy, is that where Daddy's buried?
Yes, dear, that's where Daddy is buried.
Okay, so the 80s Twilight Zone was a really hit and miss affair. The primitive video/computer effects, which I guess technically count as CGI, are often hilariously bad. So most of the effects-heavy episodes really suffer. Remember Star Trek The Next Generation? Before they remastered it in HD and updated all the effects? Remember how cheap it looked? This is even worse. It's hella distracting. But story-wise, they did some pretty good things, and a few really great things. Shelter Skelter doesn't have a lot in the way of computer effects, except for the peace dome at the end, which looks a little bit hinky, but not enough to lose at any points. So this one mostly escapes that particular curse. Actually, the sequence where the bomb hits is really well done. And the acting is fine, though Joe Mantegna does ham it up a bit, especially early on. But his character is supposed to be a few beers in when we meet him, so we can cut him a bit of slack, just like you fine listeners do for me when I've had a few, right? The depiction of the nuked city is really well done, though it's so dark it's hard to really see much of it. Overall, it's a decent episode. And it's interesting from a historical perspective because the threat of all-out nuclear war was about to become a back-burner concern in the early 90s when the Berlin Wall came down and relations between the US and the Soviets seemed to thaw out some. This may be the last time a bomb shelter was prominently featured on network television. I'm not sure. As we've discussed previously on the podcast, Rod Serling adapted 18 of his Twilight Zone scripts into short stories for a trio of Twilight Zone paperbacks in the early 60s, an interesting reversal on the typical practice of adapting an existing short story to film. Both of the episodes we're covering this week were among those 18, and both are pretty faithful to the teleplays, with one big exception. The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street ends with a weird little coda, which adds a sort of goofy twist, which kind of seems out of place given the seriousness of what's just happened. And I was going to read it for you, but then it occurred to me to check Tom Elliot again, and wouldn't you know it, he read it on his podcast.
Damn you! God damn you all to hell!
But you know, that was like 6 years ago. Maybe there's some podcasting statute of limitations we can employ in some cases. Like maybe if it's been more than 5 years, it's okay to blatantly step on other podcasters' toes. I don't know. It's only a quick paragraph anyway, so screw it. I'm going to read it. When the sun came up on the following morning, Maple Street was silent. Most of the houses had been burned. There were a few bodies lying on sidewalks and draped over porch railings, but the silence was total. There simply was no more life. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, there was no more world, or at least not the kind of world that had greeted the morning. And by Wednesday afternoon of the following week, a new set of residents had moved into Maple Street. They were a handsome race of people. Their faces showed great character indeed. Great character and excellently shaped heads. Excellently shaped heads, 2 to each resident. Rod Serling, ladies and germs. So if you put The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street into one corner and The Shelter into the other, well, Monsters Are Due is gonna beat it senseless. The Shelter does have that cool bomb shelter angle, but it kind of pulls its punch at the last possible moment since everybody's intact at the end, at least physically. The entire cast of Monsters Are Due, meanwhile, is presumably dead by the end. So not only does the episode follow through with its punch, it flattens its opponent and the ref, then keeps on punching outside the ring and mercilessly pounds on the audience too. What a champ. I've talked in the past about Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails being a Twilight Zone fan. We can perhaps say the same of the band Skinny Puppy. They used several clips from The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street in their song Monster Radio Man back in 1992, which you're hearing right now. So we're on Facebook and Tumblr. Search for @ZonePod, and you'll practically smack right into us. You can also directly interface with us at zonepod@gmail.com. That's ZONEPOD@gmail.com. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, it seems like Craig could have gone way more in depth on this whole civic defense atomic era thing. Hey, message received, loud and clear. So check it out. Next week, we're going to cover the granddaddy of all Twilight Zone nuclear annihilation episodes. You know which one I'm talking about. And in the process, we're going to dive Geiger counter first into the fascinating world of atomic TV with our very special guest and resident TZ music guru, Dr. Reba Wisner. See, she's not just about music. She's multifaceted, multidimensional. Do check it out. Till then, kids, be kind to your neighbors, especially the ones you don't like. And damn it, play nice.
Understand the procedure now. Just stop a few of their machines and radios and telephones and lawnmowers. Throw them into darkness for a few hours and then sit back and watch the pattern. And this pattern is always the same?
Between light and shadow.